The prototype. We've seen him 2 times in game, and both times he was dragging the antagonist we just killed to an unknown place. However, we know his story runs much deeper because of how he's mentioned in the various tapes around the factory. But the more I listen to these VHS tapes and logs, the more I wonder, how does the prototype have so much control over these toys? I mean, we know that not all of these toys like the prototype like Kissy Missy, but for some reason they still followed him. So with these questions, I did some digging, and it will shock you because it might just explain what happened to Kissy and even how the game will end. Let me explain first with why and how he's controlling these toys. Before the prototype controlled his first toy, he actually would try to help the orphans from Playcare escape the factory. The only orphan we know from this is Theodore Grambel, who is now known as Catnap. In 1989, the prototype befriended Theodore, which led to him making many drawings of the prototype. The prototype was dismissed as Theodore's imaginary friend because before this, the scientists thought the prototype escaped the factory. After seeing that Theodore was the next orphan that was going to be turned into a toy, the prototype tried to help him escape, but it didn't go as planned, and Theodore electrocuted himself. So the prototype did the only thing he could and brought Theodore back to the human scientists like Harley Sawyer. After the scientists obtained Theodore, instead of helping him recover, they almost immediately turned him into Catnap. This would cause the prototype to lose almost all love for human adults, which would lead him to devise a large plan to get rid of them all. This led the prototype to control his first toy, Huggy Wuggy, in the restricted disappearance tape. He apparently told Huggy Wuggy to leave the factory, which would lead to 11 deaths and 6 disappearances of Playtime co-employees. The only problem with this, though, is that the way Huggy moved was strange. It was almost like it wasn't the bumbling Huggy we know and love, but someone else controlling him. Think about it. The way he killed everyone in the forest was nothing like how the Huggy we know would. Instead of just chasing them down on sight, he used straight-up guerrilla warfare and would stealth mission the employees trying to find him. Now, even past this change in behavior, we also know that he somehow wasn't found by anyone else while being in the forest for 4 hours, which we know because of the end of the tape and the letter from Leith Pierre. Now, this seems pretty normal because we know that the factory is surrounded by at least 1 mile of forest in every direction, but then you have to notice that he was out there for 4 hours, constantly moving. If this was Huggy, he would have either fought the employees by charging at them, which he didn't, or ran in a straight direction until he found a way out. So with all of this, we can safely assume that Huggy was being controlled by what seems to be the prototype from the given context clues. However, how did he control Huggy? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. We know that he was stated to meet with Huggy and then would quote-unquote influence him, which more than likely means he gained control of Huggy through that meeting, which could only mean one of 2 things. One, the prototype implanted something into Huggy or made him inhale or eat something that gave him control over Huggy. Or 2, the prototype brainwashed Huggy and controlled him through that. It is assumed that the prototype has a large TV screen in the middle of his body because of the analog horror theme that Poppy Playtime has. This would mean that if 2 is correct, then the prototype can control anyone by just getting them to look at his screen. Either way, this means that it is very easy for the prototype to control the toys, resulting in the Hour of Joy, where we see the absolute limits of his powers. We see that on August 8th, 1995, the prototype controlled almost every toy for an hour to kill every human in the factory, no matter who they were. We know that some of the toys like Mommy most likely did this partially out of free will, but other toys like Kissy Missy were completely controlled by the prototype for a short period of time to kill all of the remaining employees. At the end of this massacre, it seems that the prototype let go of control of all of these toys and let them do as they please as long as they didn't go out of the factory. But weirdly, before he did this, he made sure that he locked Poppy Playtime up in a box where no other toy would be at. Now, this is extremely strange because why lock up Poppy out of all of the toys? What did she do that made him so scared to not kill her, but instead just put her in a case instead? Well, my only explanation is that Poppy can actually counter the prototype's mind control. See, this makes sense because of 2 things. Number 1 is how Kissy Missy randomly stopped being controlled by the prototype after she met Poppy again. We know that Poppy knew her in the past and also had some sort of group with some of the toys like Dog Day. We know this because of Dog Day's line, "You're Poppy's angel," which implies that our arrival was planned beforehand, and also the many objects with poppy flowers on them, seemingly hinting that Poppy was almost like a rival of the prototype before the events of the game. This group, however, was easily dismembered when the prototype waited for Kissy to be transported away from Poppy, resulting in the prototype remotely controlling her, and then using that time to contain all of the other group members like Dog Day and even Poppy herself. This would result in Kissy and the other toys being unable to reach Poppy, which would result in them secretly making a plan on how to break her out, leading them to make us a letter that brought us to the current events of the game. Let's now go to Chapter 2. After we break Poppy out of her case, she seemingly disappears for a bit and comes back, saying that she just had to go for a bit. I believe that for that bit of time she met up with Kissy and set her free of the prototype's control, resulting in Kissy helping us later in the chapter and later on in chapter 3. And number 2 is that Poppy for some reason is loved much more than the prototype by the scientists, and also is just as renowned. We know that her and the prototype are the 2 only successful experiments that the factory has ever produced, which means that they are both clearly capable of many things that surpass human capabilities. The only difference is that the prototype was the strongest toy of history, while Poppy is the strongest toy of the modern age. Wait a minute. Anyways, this further proves that Poppy would have the power to reverse the prototype's rule on certain toys. With this, we can determine how the rest of the game will go, and we can even solve a few plot holes. Let's start with the plot holes. With the information that the prototype can control toys by just making them look at him, we can assume that he can do the same with humans because all of the toys are just modified humans. With this, we can determine that Harley might actually just be accumulated into the prototype instead of regularly dead. This is because with the assumption that the prototype found out that he can mind control earlier than the Huggy breakout, we can assume that at the end of log 24496, that instead of the prototype mimicking Harley's voice, he actually mind controlled him, causing Harley to say the exact words that the prototype wanted him to say. This could have resulted in the prototype accumulating Harley similarly to how the skeleton on the prototype idol was placed, almost like a trophy to prove to everyone that he won. This would also explain how in the Catnap tape, Harley was described as out of commission, almost like they were trying to hide from Catnap that Harley was accumulated to prevent him from having too much hope. But luckily, Catnap already knew this and retaliated with exclaiming that the prototype will save us. Another plot hole that this solves is how the mini critters knew the exact location of Dog Day and specifically chose to eat him right then and there rather than before, possibly to have a quick way to kill Dog Day before he gave too much information out to us. If you guys know any more plot holes that this solves, let me know in the comments and like the video while you're down there so I can buy the overpriced Poppy Playtime merch. Anyways, now that the plot holes are filled in, let's cover the rest of the chapters. We know that at the end of chapter 3, Kissy was taken by something and screamed over it, causing Poppy to be worried and try to save her. Assuming that the control theory is correct, Poppy is most likely scared that Kissy will be brainwashed and will be trying to kill us in chapter 4, which is why we're trying to save her before it's too late. This could also result in us finding the new chapter 4 villain, who is most likely the one who is trying to bring Kissy to the prototype. This would make chapter 4 end with us meeting with the prototype, resulting in chapter 5 where we are being hunted and are trying to kill him without us being caught and brainwashed. This would all eventually result in us either killing the prototype or sacrificing ourselves to kill him by being accumulated, both of which would result in us burning down most of the factory and finally letting the toys rest in peace, knowing that this cycle of hate has finally ended. But that's just a theory. A Poppy theory. If you want to see a video about how the mini critters and the dead smiling critters are possessed by the prototype too, click here.